Sometimes you think you're living in Groundhog's Day, where the same things happen over and over and over again. But instead of Phil Connors waking up every single morning, it's every 3 years in Lexington. Is this going to be another double-digit win season with a new quarterback, a new offensive coordinator, but the same old lovable Mark Stoops? Welcome on into SEC Unfiltered. He's Dave Shumate. I'm Cole Thompson, coming to you live, breaking down every game heading into week one of the SEC 2024 season. And we head on over to Lexington Kroger Field, where the Wildcats will be playing host to the Southern Miss Golden Eagles in what could be a year to remember for the Wildcats. Make sure that you download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Follow us on social media. He's at Mock 10 Sports. I'm at Mr. Cole Thompson. We are at SEC Unfiltered. And ladies and gentlemen, we are freaking everywhere, so make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that also you're following us on all of our channels when it comes to podcasting. Wherever you get your podcast listening systems, leave a 5-star review if you love this type of content. Leave a 1-star review if you're lying to yourself and saying you hate this type of content. And to keep up with everything that we're doing, make sure that you visit SECUnfiltered.com. Guys, the games are right around the corner, and this show is brought to you by SeatGeek. Use promo code SECU for $20 off with your first purchase. Who does not want to head to Kroger Field to watch the beatdown of a lifetime as the Wildcats set the standard in 2024? Do so at SeatGeek.com with the promo code SECU for $20 off. Shumate, this is one of those weird teams. Every 3 years, it's like wash, rinse, repeat. You already can feel it in the air that expectations are going to be a little bit higher. New quarterback, new offensive coordinator, still potent defense. We saw what happened with Terry Wilson in 2018. We saw what happened in 2021 with Will Levis. Are we going to see something similar when it comes to Brock Vandagriff, Bush Handman, and, of course, this big blue Kentucky defensive front?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big question. I think everybody's fired up to see the Bush Hamden project, the Brock Vandagriff project. I think we know what we're going to get with the defense. I think we usually know that every year. But I think me and you talked about it. I mean, you got 10 starters back, 10 out of 11 starters back on the defensive side of the ball, arguably a top 3 to 4 defense of our front seven. You can make a case depending. I think there's a lot of good front sevens in this league, but Kentucky definitely has one, probably the best interior defensive lineman in Deion Walker going into the year. They brought in Jamon Dumas-Johnson. I'm fired up about the defense. I want to see the offense. Can the big blue wall get back to its normal days? Can Brock Vandagriff add a dynamic of probably going to be a little scheme where they're going to use him in between the tackles in the run game, something we didn't see with Devin Leary or Will Levis previously. So I'm interested to see that. I mean, I think it's got to start. It's a low-hanging fruit, but I think we got to start on the offensive side of the ball because I think that's the difference between Kentucky being anywhere from 7 wins to 9 wins this year.
I think the crazy part is that, yes, they did add in a superstar defensive player from the SEC in Jamon Dumas-Johnson. They also got a quarterback from the SEC in Brock Vandagriff, who, if anyone knows me, I believe in the multiverse. There is a world where Stetson Bennett is now working at Kia because of Brock Vandagriff just lit up spring football, and he is a 2-time national champion. Maybe got Carson Beck as your starting quarterback. But you bring up that offensive line. Few newcomers coming on over from SEC programs. Gerald Mincey taking over at right tackle. You also get Jalen Farmer coming on over from Florida, taking over at left guard. How does this offensive line be able to withstand the pressures of playing against SEC opponents? One of the biggest blessings that I've always said is that when you get to go up against a great defensive front, you get that blessing to be able to understand what you can expect every week in the SEC. And let's just keep a buck. They have the best defensive tackle for my money in the SEC in Deion Walker. They have arguably the best defensive lineman in the SEC. I mean, in the country in Deion Walker. They got a great secondary. They have some pieces at linebacker. They've been going through the woodshed over the last few weeks to prepare for this game. But we are going to talk a little bit about Brock Vandagriff. He is finally getting his start. The thing about him, and a lot of people that you've spoken to in Lexington, around the program, even at Georgia, there's a little bit of Will Levis to his game. There's a little bit of that speed element. You get him outside the pocket, he is not afraid to tuck and run. Is this going to be a benefactor for Kentucky's offense, especially when you have the question marks at running back now with sweet baby Ray Davis in the NFL?
Yeah, I'm saying you're talking about Brock Vandagriff in the run game being in for them. Yeah, I totally think that's going to be a dynamic game we hadn't seen. And they haven't really – I mean, Will Levis could pick up – if something broke down 3rd and 80, you go pick it up, slide, pick up a first down. But you're actually going to see Vandagriff design runs here. Go look at what Bush Hamden did with I mean, a current SEC quarterback in Taylor Green at Arkansas last year at Boise. So I think you can go look at that. I think that'll also take a little bit of that pressure off the offensive line. Because, again, I mean, if they get to the second level, that's on the quarterback to go make the next guy miss. And I think something else we're not talking. Eric Wolford back, the Alabama offensive line coach. He's back at Kentucky as the offensive line coach. Last time Kentucky really had their kind of chip on their shoulder as the Big Blue Wall offensive line, he was the leader of that group. He was the coach of the offensive line unit for the Big Blue Wall then. I think that's a factor. But, yeah, I think that's one of the more X factors in the entire league from a perspective that I think people that don't really follow Kentucky hard or follow Brock Vandagriff hard know that that's one of his strengths. And I think Bush Hamden's a smart enough offensive coordinator. He's familiar with using quarterbacks like that to fit that into the offensive system this year.
I'm going to say something controversial, and it's not supposed to come off this way, but I know people are going to take it in the wrong sense. Sometimes going to a new program and hitting the reset button is the best thing for you, and it's why Bo Nix went from being the laughingstock on the Plains to being a Heisman finalist and a couple of plays away from leading his team to the college football playoff, and also a first-round pick in the NFL draft who just showed out in the preseason, largely due to that design runs. I think you could see the same type of resurgence for Brock Vandagriff the way that we saw with Bo Nix. The ability to utilize his legs, the ability to have those run-oriented plays. He's got great arm strength. If you've watched any bit of UK Twitter, you have seen what the velocity of that football looks like leaving his hands and how he is able to pinpoint target players. And also now if he gets the offensive line protection, I think that there's a lot to like about the future of this team. And again, when you lose Kenny Dillingham, you bring in Will Stein. Sometimes that is going to cost you a little bit of time. But when I look at this, Bush Hamden's coming on in. It's a more, I think, offense catered to his strengths. This could be a game against Southern Miss where we are talking about Brock Vandagriff really establishing himself as one of these quarterbacks that you don't want to play in a shootout fashion on Saturday. Defensively, we know about Deion Walker. But maybe who's another name that we got to start talking about that is going to eventually be that big blue X factor and maybe even catch you a win or two?
We discussed Jamon Dumas-Johnson already, but I'm kind of like J.J. Weaver. Fired up to see him at the jack spot, bringing some pressure. We know about, like you said, we talked about the interior of the defensive line. I think bringing that edge from a perspective of, the defense has 10 and 11 starters back. They have Maxwell Hairston at one corner spot. Do think there's some guys that have played, but I'm not overly jacked about them as players. They just couldn't replace them. I think that is only going to help, as we know. 2 + 2 = 4. Pass rush is a secondary's best friend. I think if J.J. Weaver can assist with that, that'll take that pressure a little bit off the secondary outside of everybody not named Maxwell Hairston.
You have a championship caliber mentality coming on in from Georgia. You also have a championship mentality coming on in from Ann Arbor. I'm going to go with DJ Waller Jr. This is the free safety that they brought in from the Wolverines. I'm excited to see how he is going to fit in. He didn't get a lot of playing time last year, largely due to the fact that he was a freshman in a team that was bent on winning a national title before everything came down with Title IX, before everything came down with Connor Stallions. He probably had no idea about it, but maybe he's taken some of those plays and implemented them in this defense. We already know that we're getting this stellar play from Mark Stoops' defensive front, which, by the way, Mark Stoops has arguably the best job in college football. He gets to fight realistic expectations. He gets to lead his team to a bowl game. He gets to go out on top every year as one of the better coaches in the SEC, and he gets paid $7 million to do so. I think that adding in a guy like DJ Waller ups the ante a little bit because of what the potential is for him in coverage. He might be a name that we talk about as somebody that is flying under the radar going into November and might garner a lot more all-SEC interest. One player in this game that you expect to be the storyline, just the one dude when all is said and done, we are talking about him going into that South Carolina matchup. Could be offense, could be defense, could be special teams, but who you got?
I'm going to take the low-hanging fruit. I think this is it's the big question mark for me with just Kentucky. I think it's Brock Vandagriff. It's the low-hanging fruit, not trying to make it more complicated what it is. That's the guy that's going to have to make the impact. I think they're going to, depending on how the game's going, probably take away some of those run plays just because obviously they're trying to get him through a season. But I think first half is going to be really fun to watch for Kentucky here against Southern Miss. I just think he's going to be the storyline. I think everybody's kind of like, all right, I know the defense, check the box. the wide receivers, I know they led the league in drop passes last year, but they do have a lot of weapons with Marion Brown, Dane Key. Like you see the potential there. I like the tight ends, Josh Caddis as well too. I think it just all comes down to that marriage between Hamden and Brock Vandagriff. We get that ball rolling, boys. 9 wins is very attainable. Very attainable. I think he's the storyline, good, bad, or indifferent for Kentucky heading into that week 2 SEC opener, which me and you've talked about, Cole. That is one of the more underrated games in the league, and it's a must-win, I think, for both those teams. So I think that'll be the talk heading into that big one week 2.
It's not only the must-win game, but it's also, in my opinion, one of the more slept-on games nationally throughout the entire regular season because of how much that is going to set the tone in a crossroads season for both these squads. You already mentioned Dane Key. You already mentioned Marion Brown. You mentioned the tight end room. You did not mention the newcomer that comes on in from Denton, Texas, Jamori Macklin from the Mean Green Machine down at UNT. I'm excited to see what he can be. He is a burner. Guy last year led Conference USA in yards after catch, complete receptions. On top of that, he also was a go-to receiver for a roster that felt like they were on the cusp of making it to a Conference USA title. He's joining the SEC mentality. The thing is, so many people say you weren't built for the SEC because if you started elsewhere, this is a guy that if you allow him to beat you at the line of scrimmage, you're going to be eating his dust as he's walking in for 6. I'm excited to see what Jamori Macklin can do for this offense. I'm excited to see how they utilize him in Bush Handman's system. I think there's a lot of opportunities for this to be a high potent passing attack, and I'm going to be expecting a lot from Macklin, Brown, and Key. But I think Macklin is going to be one of those guys that we talk about in a very prominent light, maybe even all SEC light. Final score prediction, over-under line set at, I think, 37.5. The last time that these two teams played against each other, back-to-back weekends in 2016 and 2017, it was a tie, 1-1. But 2017, Kentucky get the last laugh. Kentucky get the last laugh in this one.
You said the line's 37.5?
37.5.
Whew. So see Southern Miss. All right. So I got Will Hall, 4th year, big year. Yeah, decent shot. Will Hall's not at half.
25.5. My apologies.
25. I was about to say, man, I may take freaking 30 because they're going to come fired up because they had Ethan Crawford, the Hillcrest Tuscaloosa quarterback, as their starter. They also brought in Tate Rodemaker, who people remember is the backup from Florida State. He's now the backup at Southern Miss. So that'll be interesting. It was kind of one of those things that he had to fire everybody, and they hired his coordinators for him a little bit. So it's one of those, his hands were stringing. 25. Give me Kentucky at the 25. I like Kentucky over there. If it was 37, like we were talking initially, I was like, yeah, I'll probably take the points with Southern Miss. I think I can see this game being closer at the half. Again, under 20 points. But I think Southern Miss is going to come out with a chip on their shoulder. First game. They're not an untalented squad. They're in a good conference, the Sun Belt, fighting for their coaches' lives essentially right off the bat. But I think Kentucky, midway through the second quarter on, really starts to control this game.
I think it all comes down, in my opinion, to the rushing attack. Can you set the standard on the ground, or are you just going to have to be an air raid attack in this moment? If so, all right, then maybe you'll see Southern Miss hang around for the first half. But if not, I think Kentucky runs away with this one. I'm hammering that 25.5-point line. I'm even looking at the over-under win. I mean, the whole total at 50.5. There's a very good shot that you could see 40 points come from Kentucky in this game if they know how to run the football. But I think this is a big litmus test for what we know about Kentucky football, especially with what waits on the horizon in week 2. I'm going to go ahead and say they win this game. I want to see Chip Trayanum run the football efficiently. I want to see that big blue line be the big blue line of old that we know and love. If that's the case, I think that we're in for a really interesting season down in Lexington in 2024. But that does it for us here on SEC Unfiltered pre-game show. Make sure that you download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Leave a 5-star review if you love this type of content, a 1-star review if you hate this type of content. Make sure that you're following us on all the socials, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at SEC Unfiltered. You want to scream and yell at me on Twitter, it's at Mr. Cole Thompson. You want to compliment Dave for his nice hairline, go ahead, at Mach10 Sports. You want to make sure that you keep up with the #1 source for all things SEC related, visit SECUnfiltered.com. Until next time, Big Blue Nation, he's Dave Shumate, I'm Cole Thompson. Later!